Welcome to the first episode of Art and Culture series presented by Bharata First. Today on our show, we have with us Mrs. Uma Narayan Swami, who is the daughter and disciple of Guru Srimani of Kalasadan. She is a Bharatanatyam guru with 4 decades of experience. Also joining us is Dr. Sri Ram Narayan Swami, son of Mrs. Uma Narayan Swami. He is a Sanskrit scholar, Carnatic vocalist, and Bharatanatyam teacher. Namaste, Uma ma'am and Sriram sir. Welcome to the very first episode of our art and culture series. I'm really glad you guys are here. I would like to start the show by reciting this quote from Guruji Srimani. He always said that a philosopher's soul dwells in his head, a poet's soul in his heart, the singer's soul lingers around the throat, but the soul of a dancer pervades all over the body. The very last line where he says the dancer's soul pervades all over the body, like I think that gives you an idea of the intensity with which a dancer holds any dance form that they practice close to their heart. Today we will discuss one such dance form, which is Bharatanatyam, one that happens to be close to my heart. I decided to choose this topic because when I look back to my school time, about whatever we heard about Bharatanatyam in our textbooks, it was mainly about revolving around the Devadasi Abolition Act of 1947. That is what our history books usually have, a lot of them. And even the online articles, that is what they usually talk about. But today in this conversation, I want to go back in time to like way before 1947 and go back to the days when Bharatanatyam was like really new. I have no idea about the origins or anything of it. So Sriram sir, we can start with you. If you could shed some light upon that aspect of Bharatanatyam.
You did a very good introduction. As you said, whether it is the history of India or Indian performing arts, it does not begin with 1947. It is only an important milestone in the political history of the country, but our history dates back to millions of years. And of the several granthas, shastras that the sacred land of Bharata has given to this world, Natya Shastra is one of them. Here we also need to discuss about the term Natya. Natya is an untranslatable word. You cannot find a word in English or any other non-Indian language that can sufficiently explain the meaning of the word Natya, because it is very deep and heavy. Briefly, I can say that Natya refers to the entire gamut of Indian performing arts. It includes vocal music, instrumental music, pure dance, expressions, sentiments, all put together. Even theatre architecture is a part of Natya. So Natya is wrongly translated as dance. It is the entire science revolving around performing arts. And this Natya Shastra is the oldest work in the history of dramatics across the world. And coming to our art form, Bharatanatyam, as you say, the name may be of a recent origin that came into existence in the 20th century, but the art has been in existence for at least the last 2 millennia. And there are enough evidences for that from our literature. Firstly, we go to the Natya Shastra itself. Like any other art form, any other performing art, dance or music, Bharatanatyam too owes its origin to the Natya Shastra only. And there are some references which vaguely point out towards the existence of a dance form, perhaps Bharatanatyam in its earlier avatar, even during the times of Bharatamuni, which is generally accepted as 1st century CE. So here, while discussing the Lasyangas, Bharata says they are the solo performances by a female character, the heroine, who, in a state of separation, sings about her beloved. Either her lamentation over separation or her expectation of a future union. All these are named as different Lasyangas in the Natya Shastra. The same theme is visible even today in our Bharatanatyam in the form of padas and padavarnas. The Nayika, longing for the Nayaka, is the theme that was seen in the Lasyangas of Natya Shastra, is seen even today in our padas and padavarnas. So this is not just the only similarity. We also have the description of pravrittis in the Natya Shastra. Pravritti in the sphere of our Natya means a regional variant or a regional style of Natya. So while discussing these pravrittis, Bharatamuni says, there is a pravritti called Dakshinatya, as the name suggests, belonging to the south of India. And he gives a list of the provinces which are covered under this name. Of course, they are not very relevant over here. And while defining the Dakshinatya pravritti, he says, it is characterized by Angika Abhinaya. Angika Abhinaya means bodily gestures. The style is highly graceful and it is noted for its rich musical content. So the three features of Dakshinatya pravritti are very, very clearly seen in Bharatanatyam even today. And this is corroborated by the Tamil works, Sangam works such as Shilpadigaram and Manimekale, which also refer to the existence of classical dance form or a Koothu, which was in vogue during the times these epics were composed. And one more similarity, which points out that our art form is derived from the Natya Shastra, is that the adavus are the basic steps that are taught to the students of dance, Bharatanatyam. They are nothing but combinations of the charis, that is the gates, the mandalas or the poses, the brahmaris or the circular movements, the nritta hastas or the hand poses, which have all been defined in the Natya Shastra of Bharatamuni. So it is only that some elements have been taken and some are given up. That is how we can point out towards the origin of Bharatanatyam from the Natya Shastra. Of course, we need to bear in mind that Bharatanatyam is a nritya. That is, dance is defined in the treatises as threefold: nritta or pure dance, nritya, expressive dance which has abhinaya, interpretive dance as many would like to call it, and natya or dramatic representation. As far as Bharatanatyam is concerned, it is undoubtedly a nritya variety where every word has to be expressed through the appropriate hand gestures and facial expression.
Right.
Nritya or pure dance is integral to it, and Natya is just incidental as far as Bharatanatyam is concerned. On the other hand, the art of Bharata includes everything and concentrates more on the dramatic representation. There, Nritya and Nritta become only accessories, and the principal element is the Natya. So therefore, there are also some differences between the Natya of Bharata and the Bharatanatyam that we practice today.
Right.
Natya Shastra has 4 abhinayas. The Angika Abhinaya, the bodily gestures; Vachika, the dialogues; Aharya, the costumes and the makeups; and then they have the Satvik Abhinaya, psychos, physical gestures. Bharatanatyam mainly focuses on the Angika Abhinaya. All the dance forms are mostly born out of the Natya Shastra by retaining some of the aspects and discarding some of the aspects of the Natya Shastra, like the cheek movements in Kathakali, the hip movements in Odissi, where in Bharatanatyam we don't use these 2 movements. This is how they have created their own style. And Natya Shastra mentions about Lokadharmi and Natyadharmi. Lokadharmi is realistic portrayal, whereas Natyadharmi is artistic portrayal. And Bharatanatyam we follow Natyadharmi. Natya Shastra is a wide scope. So the teachers today prefer to refer to the Abhinaya Darpana of Nandikeshwara, which is relevant to this art form. That is how there is a differences in the dance that are
between our present day
Bharatanatyam and
Natya Bharata.
Very precisely and briefly, very well explained, ma'am. Also, just one question. So, sir, you spoke about the very early raw form of this dance. So you dated it back to somewhere 1st century or something. So how old would that be?
The date of Bharata and the Natya Shastra are again two debatable things. But we can safely conclude that there are references to Natya in the grammatical works which belong to the late Sutra period. So at least Bharata's Natya Shastra is at least 2000 years old. It could be perhaps even older, but we can say with a great amount of confidence that it is at least 2000 years old. So our Bharatanatyam too must have been that old, since there is a reference to Dakshinati Pravritti, etc. And if Bharata has mentioned Dakshinati Pravritti in the Natya Shastra, it implies that it would have been in existence quite before the work Natya Shastra was to be composed.
Sir, the next question I have for you is, how different is the dance form from the time that was practiced during the Rajaraja Chola's time? He institutionalized the dance form, they say. So how different is it from time it was started then to like now?
Our country has been fortunate that most of the rulers here have been great patrons of art as literature. And the Cholas have contributed greatly. With whatever pride Tamil Nadu stands today, it is mostly because of the contributions of the Cholas. They not just erected monumental temples such as Brihadishwara Temple, Ganga-Konda Cholapuram temples and all, but also ensured that these art forms, particularly the Natya, which was prevalent during their times, was adequately represented in their temples forever. So you see, the 3rd chapter of Natya Shastra mentions 108 karanas or dance poses. So you find the temples at Chidambaram, Tanjavur, Kumbakonam, Madurai, and Kanchipuram, where you have these dance poses being depicted on the temple walls and corridors. All these temples were constructed during the Chola period, Rajaraja Chola and Rajendra Chola mostly. And they bear testimony to the inclination of the Chola kings and the patronage they extended towards dance. It is not just that, but it is known through various sources that the Brihadishwara temple, which was constructed by Rajaraja Chola, had 400 dancers, temple dancers, at the service of Lord Brihadishwara. So you can understand they were all taken care by the Chola rulers. From this we can understand how important dance and music were to these kings. No wonder one of the Chola ruler proudly calls himself Nritya Vinoda, the one who takes delight in dance. The name is very, very popular in epigraphic circles. Nritya Vinoda as the title of one of the Chola rulers. So that all these only point out that the Cholas were one of the greatest patrons of this art form, and particularly Bharatanatyam, since the birthplace of Bharatanatyam also happens to be the same Tanjavur. As far as the repertoire is concerned, unfortunately, we don't have enough evidences about the exact repertoire that prevailed during the Chola period. According to scholars, it is, and from the works that were produced during the Chola period, we understand that more or less it was similar to the style that was prevalent during the Natya Shastra period, with some minor differences here or there. And the present repertoire that we find today, the Margam, has been brought into existence by the great Tanjore quartet. There is 4 siblings, Chinnaya, Punnaya, Shivanandan and Vadivel. They were the great disciples of Sri Muthuswami Dikshita, eminent composers, dance teachers, and musicians in their own right. So they were the ones who formulated the present Margam comprising of Adaripu, Jatiswaram, Shabdam, Varnam, Padam, Tidana. That continues even today. So it was their foresight that they gave a definite shape to this art form. And for this, dance teachers and artists would ever remain indebted to them, to the great quartet. But here, since you asked me about the Repitva, I would like to point out that between the Chola period and the days of the Tanjore quartet, that is the late 18th century and the 19th century, some works were produced from the south of India, like Sangeeta Muktavali, Sangeeta Tarpana, and also the Sangeeta Ratnakara, which of course did not belong to the south of India. But these were some of the works which were produced around the 13th to 15th century. They contain references to some minor or regional dance styles. Words such as dance numbers such as Chali, Mukha Chali, Chali or Mukha Chali are interchangeably used. Raga, Nuga, Yetin Rittam, Shabdam, etc. are mentioned as dance varieties. So a careful observation of the definition of these numbers, Chali, Mukha Chali, and Shabdam, would reveal that they were only the precursors to modern day Adaripu, Jatiswaram, and Shabdam. So we can safely conclude that what is called as Chali in Devanacharya's Muktavali was the precursor to Adaripu, which was given a definite shape by the Tanjore quartet. Raga Anuga Yatin Rittam. As the name suggests, Yati is the ancient word for the word Jati. So Raga Anuga Yatin Rittam means where Jatis are executed accompanied by a melody, which is the same definition for a Jatiswaram. And Shabdam, where there is a combination of rhythmic syllables and words of praise. However, from the definitions, we understand that definition of Shabdam, we understand that it could be a combination of modern day Kautvam and Shabdam. But certainly they had some, the Tanjore quartet had something before their eyes in the form of these items, which they further developed into the items of today's Margam.
Next, I would like us to discuss about the Indian civilization and dance in particular, because I feel this land has given so much importance to just dances. We have an entire book written on it, Natya Shastras. And this is not something that is very common in other cultures. A lot of cultures shun and don't look upon it as like a good thing. So why is it that in our Indian culture, even like when we go to Karnataka, the Hoysala dynasty, the architecture, if you look at it, one temple called Halebeedu Temple, they have like an entire platform where the queen would perform Bharatanatyam in front of the deity.
As Bhavana, you rightly mentioned, no other civilization in the world gives so much of importance to fine arts as our Bharatiya Sanskriti does. So here, as far as Hinduism is concerned, it gives maximum importance or a place of pride to our art forms, whether music or dance, in its core philosophy and theology. Nowhere in this world you will find religions where the deities are themselves portrayed as artists or connoisseurs of arts. So here we have Nataraja performing various kinds of tandavas or dances. We have Saraswati playing on the veena. We have Hanuman, who is regarded as a Sangeeta Acharya. Krishna is a renowned flautist. He is also portrayed as dancing on the hoods of Kadiya or dancing along with the gopis, the Rasalila. Krishna is significantly called as Sakala Kaladi Guru in the Bhagavata Puranam. That is the first and foremost guru in the lineage of artists. And of course, you can go to the holy names. Every deity is somewhere or the other mentioned as Sangeeta Priya, Sangeeta Rasika, Natya Priya, Lasya Priya, and so on. So this proves the unique importance that our Bharatiya Sanskriti and Hindu Dharma gives to our performing arts. And in this connection, I would like to quote here the words of the great Advaitic philosopher Madhusudana Saraswati while commenting on the Prasthanatraya. He says, Gandharva Shastram Bhagavata Bharatena Pranitam Devata Aradhanam Nirvikalpa Samadhi Siddhi Cha Asya Prayojanam. That is Gandharva Veda, which is the technical term for Gita, Vadya, and Nritya. That is the sacred triad of vocal music, instrumental music, and dance. In Sanskrit literature, the name given to them is either Sangita or Gandharva. So this Gandharva Veda, as its objective, the worship of deities, Devata Aradhana, and Nirvikalpa Samadhi, which means moksha. So here, for us, these art forms are means to liberation, means to spirituality, and recreation only is a secondary benefit that we get out of it. So we need to bear in mind that the sole objective, the principal objective at least, should be spirituality. And the Vishnu Dharmottara Purana goes to the extent of saying that Geetam, Vadyam, Tatha, Nrittam, Datta Devaya Vishnave, Dattva Devaya Vishnave, Sarva Kama Samraddhasya, Yajnasya Phalam. That is, by offering unto Vishnu music or dance, one attains the fruit of performing a Mahayajna. So all these are abundant references to prove that arts are purely spiritual. And in our epics, history, and many of the literary works, we find, as you mentioned, women from across sections of the society, whether they were princes or cowherdesses or belonging to many other such noble families, practicing the art form of Natya. So there remains no taboo. We can understand that practicing, as you mentioned at the outset about the Devadasi tradition, it was only a dark phase. Somehow, unfortunately, it crept in and it went away. Coming back to this topic, they were all proud artists, and art practiced with spirituality was never looked down upon. And here, somehow, I surmise that women from noble families practiced dance only as a spiritual exercise in lieu of the study of the Vedas. Since we know that women were prohibited from the study of Vedas at a later period, I suppose they could have chosen these art forms as a means to please the divinity, since they had no other option, just as we have the Puranas that were composed as a means to the spiritual upliftment of women and others.
So, ma'am, the next question I have, it's for both of you. It's about the significance of the Guru Shishya Parampara, not only to dance, but across India.
Is unique to India, where Guru is placed above God. We believe Mata, Pita, Guru, Daiva. So Guru is next only to parents. The Guru selflessly teaches the Shishya all the knowledge, and it's the duty of the Shishya to preserve it and pass it on to the next generation without any dilution. So it is not necessary to change Gurus for
specializing
in any aspect of dance. They can stay with the same Guru and study whatever is required and use their skill also with experience.
Yes, definitely the base that one has got from a dancer has got from her Guru can be enriched by her own creative and interpretive skills, rather than going from one Guru to another. Because if you see, every teacher represents a particular school of dance, and a student is expected to preserve the traditions of the school without dilution. So going from one Guru to another will only dilute the purity of both the schools. So it is always better to stick to one Guru and enhance the knowledge by her own efforts.
And my father, Guru Sri Mani, was a staunch advocate of Guru Shishya Parampara, where the relationship with the student and the teacher was that of a family and not transactional. Now, even these days, we have students after 60 years who have a relationship with the Kalasadan family, even after the demise of Guru Sri Mani. This is how the relationship has to be maintained, where Guru Shishya is concerned.
Right. Ma'am, my next question to you is about the mental health aspect of Bharatanatyam. As you all know, like we are in pandemic, a lot of people are at their homes, everyone's facing some or the other mental health issue. What's the relationship between mental health and Bharatanatyam?
Yeah, before ma'am speaks of her practical experience, again, I'd like to quote here Bharata Muni himself. since you mentioned the stress of this pandemic. So Bharata in the first chapter mentions Dukkharthanam, Shramarthanam, Shokarthanam, Tapasvinam. Vishrant Jananam Kade, Natyametad Bhavishyati. That is for people overcome with sorrow and stress. This Natya would come as a remedy. This was the prediction made by Bharata Muni. And Bharata being a Rishi, his words are not bound to go untrue. And we experience that. And here it also reminds me of what my grandfather, Guru Shrimani, used to say. He used to very often say that dance is a form of samadhi, because here the mind and the senses are all concentrated. They are all withdrawn and channelized towards a specific goal. So there is no better practice of concentration than dance. It rejuvenates the mind and the body. These are the words of my grandfather. And this again echoes the words of Bharata only. While giving the list of the Mahatmya or the greatness of Natya, he says, the benefits of Natya, he says that Dharmyam, Arthyam, Yashasyam cha, Ayushyam cha hitam, Buddhivardhanam. That is, apart from teaching one Dharma and leading one to fame, Natya also bestows Ayushya, longevity in the form of good health. It is Hita, good for the mind and the body, and Buddhi Vivardhana, which sharpens one's intellect. So all these we have experienced, and ma'am can share her personal experience in this regard.
I was working with the Bank of Baroda for 30 years. And after a full day's work, really exhausted, I used to go to my dance class. But once I entered the dance hall along with my students, teaching them dance and music would really give me good relaxation. I would go back home and have a peaceful sleep. No tiredness, nothing. And we had professional doctors coming to attend dance classes who used to say, ma'am, we are here, we really feel relaxed. At least weekly once, we want to come and do it. It gives us mental relaxation. So that is it. Now, even during the pandemic, there are parents and students who want to continue it online. They say it's a relaxation for the children as well. So they are still continuing now after a gap of 2-3 months we had during the pandemic. And now it's picking up well, and the parents really want that the children continue that. It gives them relaxation.
Right. Sir, I actually agree by what you just said about what Guruji used to say about the concentration part. I think that's something I myself have experienced. While you're dancing, you're like so into like every single movement that you're making with your hands and legs. It's almost impossible to really think of anything apart from what you're so in the moment. That is probably the best way to put it. And my next question to you is, ma'am, about what age groups can do this? How long does it take for someone to train as a dancer?
Traditionally, a Bharatanatyam dancer was expected to be trained for a period of 10 years. But with passing time, the time limit has been reduced to 5 years or 6 years. Now, this art form needs flexibility of limbs and firmness of postures, which is not very easy. So a child, when she attains an age of 6 or 7, she's physically fit to adapt to these physical qualities. There are exceptions where children, they may be inborn talent in them, so they are able to pick up at an earlier age. But the ideal age seems to be 6 or 7.
As ma'am said, if a child starts at the age of, say, around 7 years, at least the basic margam is completed by the time she reaches the age of 12 or 13.
So margam is basically the sequence, the dance.
Yeah, that is from
Set of
Adaripu till Tidana. The Adavus, of course, are implied.
Right.
That is, she is prepared for the basic Arangetram course, for the performance of her Arangetram. So at least she is ready with it before the academic pressure mounts on her as she reaches 9th or 10th grade. And here what we observe is, if a child starts learning by the age of 5 or so, or even after having performed the Arangetram, say in the 8th grade, very rarely there are students who find the academic burden as an impediment in learning the art form. Once they're accustomed to this art form, it becomes an involuntary action for them. Dance and dance class becomes a part of their life, and they don't find it as an obstacle. Everything goes smoothly. But yes, there are instances where student starts her very basic course at the age of 12 or 13. And then by the time she comes to the higher grades, she would find it difficult to cope up with both and eventually drop out. So it is always better that the student starts at the age of 6 or 7, so that she is able to manage both her academics as well as the pursuit of arts.
And this is
Right.
only a general observation. Of course, where there is strong determination and passion for this art form, age really doesn't matter. That is the upper age limit. Doesn't matter. Even today, there are our students. There are students who started the basic training at the age of 40, performed the Arangetram in the mid 40s, and still continue to perform. So the upper age limit is not a thing for continue your dance or start
Right.
it.
Like, ma'am, even though I did not start doing this, practicing this dance form like really early in life, but I feel had I done it, it would have created some sort of base of more discipline, time management for me. This brings me to my next question. So, what do dancers do after they perform the Arangetram? And also, ma'am, if you can explain to our viewers what Arangetram actually is. I don't think everyone knows what Arangetram is.
Arangetram or Ranga Pravesha is the first formal presentation of the Margam learned by the student in front of a learned audience. It is almost similar to the Upanayana ritual to a student of Veda, which is just a beginning for his illustrious life. So everything doesn't end up with an Arangetram.
It's the beginning. Arangetram only marks the beginning, just as ma'am gave the perfect example of an Upanayana ritual, which is highly sacred, and thereupon the student of the Veda embarks upon a sacred journey in the path of Vedas. Likewise, Arangetram is only the first step towards a dancer's journey in the field of Bharatanatyam. So yeah, in fact, I would say that opportunities are opened up, new avenues are opened up only after the performance of Arangetram. Until the Arangetram, the student is expected to learn the Margam, which is more or less rigid. And the basics have to be rigid. You cannot have too much of flexibility when it comes to the basics. The creative side comes only after the Arangetram. So here you have, apart from the items of the Margam, you have several other pieces such as philosophical compositions. There are numerous stotras. Even bhajans, there are some philosophical bhajans which only can be executed by a mature and experienced dancers. And most importantly, following the Arangetram, a student is also expected to undertake a serious and in-depth study of the theory of dance. And once a student is well versed in theory as well as practice, then she can even try her own independent choreography, of course, within the traditional framework.
Yeah. So, ma'am, I know that a lot of kids and even adults for that matter are actually taking up Bharatanatyam during the pandemic. So are there any disadvantages of doing that like virtually at home without the physical presence of a guru?
There are certain limitations where we cannot correct the child in the proper way. When it is done physically, it's different. Now, when we show them and they watch us on screen and do it, it makes a difference. And doing physically makes a difference. Still, it's not bad for children who have learned. It is easy. But for the newcomers, it's a little, we hope they will also start learning it properly.
But there are also many plus points, also pros also as far as the virtual medium is concerned. We started off with this virtual classes only as a makeshift arrangement. When we realized that the pandemic is continuing and the lockdown had not ended by the month of June last year. By mid-June, we started these online classes, despite some reservations on our part. We had our initial difficulties, but then over the period of time, we got used to it. So did the students. And we have successfully completed 1 year of online teaching. And on the 1st of May, we had the 67th Foundation Day of Kalasaran, where the students who have been learning online with us presented whatever they have learned over the last 1 year. The hidden talent of every child can be showcased. And this exposure only boosts the confidence in a child and encourages her to do more and much better. The shadow side of it is that there is no accountability when it comes to social media. When a video is posted on any digital platform, there is no accountability. Merit, mediocre, whether there is merit or just whether it is just mediocre, there is nothing, there is no authenticity over it. And unfortunately, today we find that the likes and the views are as new yardsticks to measure, to evaluate a performance. This is a trend that we need to guard against. And a performance has to be evaluated solely on the basis of the aesthetics and not on other criteria. And another thing, it is necessary that the parents as well as the gurus, they ensure that the young children do not get carried away by the popularity on social media and ensure that perfection of the art is the goal and not getting views and likes.
From this, I think I understand that it's all about striking that balance between, not losing the authenticity of the dance, but also having it continue even during the pandemic. And how would you say that we can, encourage more, not only children, but everyone to conserve this beautiful tradition and take it ahead? So what do you think we can do to encourage more Indians here in India to do that for their kids? And also, can a scholarship be a solution, like in college? Because Bharatanatyam takes a lot of time. You have to perfect everything you do. You have to spend time with yourself. So can one thing to encourage people be like give them scholarship or probably give them leave if they have extra classes or performances?
The governments do provide some extra 5 marks and all for admissions. I'm talking about Maharashtra state policy. And I'm sure that there would be similar policies in other governments too. But this is too less an encouragement. And as you say, there is more value for our art or be it Sanskrit language and all abroad than in our own, than in the birthplace of these sacred art forms. I would suggest that just 5 marks won't help, but a significant step such as a quota reservation for students involved in the performing arts or Sanskrit who are committed in preserving our cultural heritage. Any student who has been learning dance for 5 years consistently or music for a similar period should be considered for whatever benefits the government is extending. And this will also instill a competitive spirit in the students to excel in the art form as they do it in case of academics.
With this, we come to the end of our show today. Thank you so much, Uma ma'am and Sriram sir. We hope to do many more episodes like this in the coming weeks. Thank you so much for keeping this 2000-year tradition alive. And because of people like you, I think all of us can take this ahead and reconnect to our roots of Bharata. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. If you like what we do at Bharata First and you want to contribute to our channel, you can do so by using the UPI IDs that we have in our description box below. You can also like and share this video and subscribe to our channel. We will be back again another week with another episode of Art and Culture. Thank you. Namaste.